this video, we are going to learn the basics of Ncloth and how to use it primarily for modeling. Ncloth is essentially a cloth simulation system in Maya that simulates realistic cloth materials. So I'm going to start off by setting up my Maya file. So this is just a blank Maya file, and I'm going to make sure my timeline and everything is set correctly so my simulation works. The first thing you need to do is make sure you have enough frames. For any simulation, a good number of frames to start with is 500, and you set that number and increase your timeline so that you can see all the frames 0 to 500 on that. The next thing you need to do is make sure that your playback speed is set to play every frame. So right click on your timeline to get the playback speed and set this to play every frame max real time. This will ensure that your simulation works correctly and also that you get accurate feedback when you're watching it play. The last thing that you need to set is your cached playback, which is this button right here. And that button makes sure that your simulation is saved temporarily to the disk so that you can scrub through the timeline when you need to. If this is off, then when you play back your simulation, you can just watch it play and stop it at whatever frame, but you cannot scrub through the timeline because if you do, it will essentially just try to resimulate that object. So saving it temporarily to your cache is helpful to be able to scrub through. Now that we have that set up, let's actually create the object that we're going to simulate. I'm going to start this off with a simple plane, and I'm going to click on that plane and make it a little bigger so we can see it. And the first thing for simulations is that you need a larger number of subdivisions than you would for a regular object, because cloth has a lot of folds and a lot of ways that it reacts that you need enough edges to get that detail. So I'm going to go to my polyplane options in the channel box and add a few more subdivisions. I can select both of these and just increase that a bit, maybe 20. So how many subdivisions you have, it really depends on how much detail you want. This is a good number to start off with, and we can see how much detail that gives us. So now that I have this object, I'm also going to delete the history, and I'm going to then assign the Ncloth to this. So Ncloth is found in the effects menu in Maya. So if you go to the left of your Maya window, you can see that you're usually on the modeling menu. Just change this over to effects and you will be able to access Ncloth. When you model this, you can also, so you deleted the history, edit, delete by type history. You can also freeze transformations, so modify and freeze transformations. So all your values are set to 000 and 111 in your channel box. Now, let's set up the Ncloth. You can do this by simply going up to the Ncloth menu and click on Create Ncloth. And you're not going to see any feedback yet. Actually, we didn't select this. So make sure to select this and Ncloth and Create Ncloth. The plane will still remain the same. You won't see any feedback yet, but you will see this red line in your timeline that just goes towards frame 500. When you see this blue line and red line, that essentially is showing that your cache is active, that you are saving stuff to storage. And this red line essentially means that your cache has finished simulating. So when you have that set up, you can now scrub through the timeline and see your simulation. In some cases, your cache will be inactive. So now let me just go to the Ncloth and change something on this. So you see that when it's still going through, that means that it hasn't finished caching that out. But once it finishes, you can scrub through and see real-time feedback. So how do we control how this Ncloth works? Let's look at what the clicking that button did for us. So it created Ncloth. So this is our Ncloth object. Essentially, what this is your type of cloth. So using all these settings, you will set up what type of cloth this is and what and how it's going to move. So silk, leather, burlap, all of those materials move and react in very different ways. So you would set that up on this Ncloth object. And you have your nucleus, which essentially controls the simulation. So the nucleus is where you have your gravity, so you can control that. I usually leave it at the default unless it's a specific situation. This is the default value of gravity that is always turned on. You can reduce this, so you can reduce this or remove it completely if required, but that's there. And then you have solver attributes, which essentially is used to make your simulation more accurate. It will, increasing these values will also slow down the simulation, but you'll get a better result at the end of it. When you haven't set anything else up over here and you play this back, the cloth just falls down because there's nothing stopping it from falling, and there is a force of gravity that's 9.8 meters per second that is applied to it, that is making it fall to the ground. So to control the Ncloth, we need to add additional objects that control how this falls. I had to restart my simulation because it stopped working all of a sudden. That does happen sometimes, but if that does happen, you can just restart it, remove the Ncloth, and start over. So I'm my plane here, and I'm going to add a collider object for this. So I'm going to create a cube, and I'm going to use that to collide the plane. Let's move that a little lower. So let's say this is my table or any sort of collider object. And to actually make this Ncloth interact with this new object, you need to set this to be a collider. And before doing that, let's delete the history. And once you create an Ncloth, do not delete the history of this object. So instead of, when you're adding new objects, instead of delete all by type, just go to delete by type with your new object selected and just delete the history of this new object. So now that we set deleted history, we can go to Ncloth and create passive collider. Make sure that your cube is selected and create passive collider. Your simulation will run through the cache again, so you see that red line moving and doing what it is supposed to. So let's wait for that to happen for a bit, and then let's play it back. And now it is nicely setting itself on this table. So this is a great way to set this up. So let it play back, and it sets itself on this table in a certain way. Now, depending on the type of cloth you want your tablecloth to be, you might want this to settle down in a different way. So let's go and change some settings so we can edit this. To edit our Ncloth settings, we need to go to this Ncloth object and go to our attribute editor. Over here, we can set the settings. So I'm not going to go too much into all of these settings because there are a lot and it can get confusing. I just want to show you some of the presets that exist in Ncloth. So if I'm on Ncloth Shape 1, I'll make sure I have this selected. I'm on Ncloth Shape 1. I have the presets option and I have a bunch of materials here. So these materials are great. You can use them for multiple things. So let's maybe set this to silk and replace. It will run through that again. It'll change some of these settings in here to mimic the properties of silk. And let's play that back. And it's going to fall a little slower now. It needs more time to simulate that. Let's let it run a little more, and let's play that back again. And now you see that the folds are a lot finer. Silk generally has finer folds, it's a thinner material, and then it settles down. So I'm not going to play it all the way through. Let me go back. So you saw how silk looks. And let's go back to the attribute editor, and let's set a different preset. Let's set maybe denim, which is a very different material. So heavy denim is a very different material than silk is. So we set that up and let this go through the timeline, play that back. And This creates bigger folds. Denim does not bend as much. It's not as thin or soft of a material. So it creates bigger folds on an Ncloth. So this is how you'd control the cloth. You can also control your passive collider. So that is N-rigid one is the object that gets formed that controls the colliding properties. You could change these if you need to. You could add some thickness. So how thick is this object and how does this cloth fall on top of it? You could change the friction, the bounce, some of these settings. If you reduce the friction, the object might just slide off. So you can change the settings and see what they do. But generally, try to leave these at the default unless you want something specific to happen. So let's play that back and let's see what it does. So this still looks pretty similar to what it did earlier. Changing that didn't do too much, but essentially you would use this to control that, and you can always go back to your nucleus and change your gravity. You can change other settings in here. So that's how you would model a tablecloth, and this can be anything. Like you could set this tablecloth to be of any shape, whatever shape it is, as long as it has enough subdivisions, it will fall down and create that Ncloth object. Let's look at how to create a pillow using Ncloth. So I'm going to start off with a cube and let's model this to look a little bit like a pillow. And you can actually change these cube settings using the channel box and adding a width and height to this to control that a little better. So this is my pillow. I'm going to add subdivisions to the width, height, and depth. Try to make it even all the way through. So try to make even squares all the way through. And maybe you might need to reduce some on the depth. You don't need so many. Maybe not the depth, that's the height here. So reduce some on the height, you don't need so many. And let's add some more on the width. Try to get them as even as possible. So now this is our Ncloth pillow. We can delete history, so edit delete by type history. And now let's go and add Ncloth properties to this. So let's start off by creating Ncloth, create Ncloth. That starts it off. But for a pillow, what we want to do is we don't want it to fall like a tablecloth does. We want it to puff up so we can control how that works. So let's go to our attribute editor, and when we have the Ncloth selected, we can also go to the nucleus and edit this. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove gravity. So gravity is 9.8 by default, so if I play this back, it's going to fall. I'm going to remove that gravity altogether and set that to 0. And I am then going to create some properties on this cloth to make sure it works. So let's go to Ncloth shape 1, select that, and let's add a preset. Let's say silk. Depending on how you want your cloth to look, you choose that preset. Once you have that preset, you want to go scroll down on all these drop downs, go to pressure. And within pressure, all I'm going to do is increase this pressure slightly, and we'll see what that does. So I'm going to start off with this really random value. Let that play through so that we can see the simulation. Okay, it's simulated enough now. The red line's almost all the way through, so I'm going to play that back. And you can see how that creates a nice puffy pillow. So that's basically it. You can play this back, let it puff as much as you want. The more this pressure is, the more the pillow is going to puff. It is also, let this simulate all the way through, but it is also dependent on how much topology you have, how many edges, and depending on that, it's going to create that amount of detail. You can try using a different preset to get a different type of pillow, but essentially just add pressure. Every time you change the preset, you need to go back and change those pressure settings again. But if you add pressure, let it play through the timeline, it will create that pillow. The pressure setting for the pillow is just going to puff it up. So it's just going to puff up like this. And you won't really get extra detail. Like what if you have someone sleeping on this, or if you want the pillow to be a different shape from one of the sides. In this case, you can use a passive collider, so similar to the object that we used for creating the tablecloth, to control the shape of this pillow. And in this situation, I'm going to actually try to animate that passive collider. So I'm going to create a sphere and set that over here next to the pillow. And I'm just going to add keyframes on this. So I'm going to select that sphere, click on S to add a keyframe at the beginning, and maybe go to like frame 20. So this is kind of where the pillow starts popping up. So maybe go here and move this forward. So let's move it forward, make sure it is interacting with the pillow, and click on S to create another keyframe. So now I have two keyframes. It goes through those two keyframes. And finally, when you have that, you need to make this into a collider so it collides with this object. So I go to Ncloth and create passive collider and let this run through. Now it's run through enough. Let's play it back. And essentially that lets us make this object collide with something else. So you can change that collide strength. So you could select this rigid object and set it to a higher collide strength. You can even make this a bigger object. So let's go back to this. Let's actually break the scale property from the animation. So select these three and break connections. And now let's scale this up and let's let it run through that and see how affecting that scale affects us. And I'm going to go back to N rigid and also change the collide strength to like 2. And that's going to create a way bigger simulation. Maybe I'll reduce that a bit so it's not too much. Let's let it run through, and maybe now I can start playing back, and it's going to affect that in different ways. And if you were modeling, you would essentially let this play back, and then you can scrub through your timeline and choose a frame that you like for your final model. So let's say maybe one of these frames is good. So maybe this one is something that you like, and you can let it settle a bit. So after the sphere hits it, you can let it settle for a bit, and then maybe you can choose this frame. So you can choose that frame, and then we can take this further. Before seeing how to export our Ncloth objects, let's make our final object, which is going to be a curtain. This becomes a little more complicated because you want your curtains to be affected by gravity. You don't want it to fall to the ground, but you want it to be affected by gravity. So in this case, we're going to use constraints to set that up. Let me create my plane. So this is my curtains, and let's go to that plane and add maybe a height, a width. Okay, yeah, width is fine. And add some subdivisions, maybe some more. And let's change the height and just keep adding subdivisions till you're happy. We need even subdivisions all across. I am trying to get this to be squares, so maybe 60 this way. So these are almost squares, so this is good. And width and height. And remember that the default gravity for Ncloth, you can change this, but the default gravity is always facing downwards. So it's a good idea to rotate this 90 degrees so that it is facing the correct direction that a curtain would face. And once you set that up, get this rotated 90 degrees, you can delete the history. So now let us start setting up the curtain, and I'm going to create an object that is essentially maybe a curtain rod that will hold this up. I'm going to use a cylinder for that, and I'm going to scale this, move it up, and rotate this 90 degrees. This is essentially what the curtain is going to hold on to. You could use a cylinder, or you could actually just have it hold on to itself, but I'm going to use a cylinder. I'm going to add some subdivisions so that we have something for it to hold on to, and I'm going to move that side. Let's move that so that it is here, and once we have that set up, we can start doing our Ncloth. So I'm going to select delete all by type and history for this, and select this object and the same thing, Ncloth, and create Ncloth. And now, this is going to fall, so it's just going to fall to the ground. We want this to stay up, and we still want it to be affected by gravity, but we want it to stay up. So I will select this, and let's add some constraints. You can find Ncloth constraints in the menu called Nconstraint, and the one that I'm going to use is called transform constraint. So I can use either. I can use transform constraint or I can use point to surface. Let's start with point to surface since we have created a surface for this to point to. To use the constraint, you need to select vertices that would apply to that constraint. So for these curtains, generally the top is attached to some surface. So we can select all of these top vertices like that, but I don't want to do that. I want to make this more accurate so that we get some nice folds. So I'm just going to, you could be cleaner while doing this. You could be more accurate with what vertices you select, but I'm just going to select a few that go all the way across. I'm going to leave some space between them so that we get some folds, but these are my vertices. So I'm going to select these and then shift click to select that object and then just go to Nconstraint and point to surface. And when I do that, it's going to take some time to run through that simulation, and let's start playing it back and see what happens. And now it creates that Ncloth, and it is now attached to that surface and it's not falling to the ground. And you can go in and you can change this. Let me add a preset. Let's say these are silk curtains. And something that is nice to do for this is to animate this surface that it's attached to so that you can get folds on the curtains. So you can, let's go to frame 0 and add a keyframe here. And then let's go maybe to frame 20 or 30, doesn't matter, and just animate this so that it's a little smaller. And you need to set that constraint to that default position. And then once you animate it, those constraints are going to move and it's going to create those folds on the curtain. So let's play that back. Let's let it run through and let's play that back. And you can see that you now have nice folds on your curtain, and until it's going to take a bit to like settle down and form the curtain. But this is how you would do that. You can, there are different ways that you could set this up. So let's say we remove that animation. So I'm going to go back to this, let it just fall over. And we want those, theater curtains. So, oh wait, let's remove that as well. And let's say we want theater curtains. So let's use a torus for this. And I'm going to reduce that radius so it's a thinner shape. And this torus is going to be what we're going to animate to create those theater curtains. So essentially, those curtains are kind of held together by rope. They're tied together. So let's create that rope. And let's make this a little smaller. So I'm going to first animate this. I'm going to set a keyframe here and then set a keyframe maybe at like frame 30, where this is super small and essentially the size of that rope, and S here. Then I just go to Ncloth and create passive collider and let that run through. Let's run through enough now. Let's play that back. So yeah, depending on what kind of curtain you want, you might want this rope to be a different size. You might want it to be a different shape. You might not want so many vertices constrained together like this, but you could use a combination of the transform constraint and of this to get the result that you want. So we've animated this. Let's animate this as well. So S, let's maybe set a keyframe here. We scale it down slightly. S, and let's let that run through. And now let's play that back. So you get really nice curtains with this. The way the shape and everything depends on what preset you use for your Ncloth from here, and how your animation for this passive collider is. So now the final step, once you are happy with your Ncloth, is to actually get this out as a model. So We are not really looking to get this animation into our scene. We just want the final model. So what you need to do is you need to go to a frame that you like. Let's say we like, so now that it's completely red, it's sprayed all the way through, we can go to, this is a frame where the Ncloth has settled down. Let's say we like this frame. And this is for any Ncloth, so it doesn't really matter which type of object it is. If you use any of those cloth objects that we created earlier, the same thing, just go to a frame that you like, and now let's save this out. So what you need to do is you need to first duplicate this. So that is Control D. That creates a new object. You can move this up. And now this is, I'm just going to actually not move it up. Let me just isolate it so we can see just this object. And we need to delete the history. So edit, delete by type history. And you'll see that even after we delete history in the attribute editor, we still see this as cloth. So something that I like to do is I like to export this cloth as an OBJ and import it into a new Maya file. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to go to File and Export Selection and export this as an OBJ export and save it. Once I save my file, I'm just going to save this if I want it, if I want to save that simulation. And I'm just going to go to a new scene. Let's go to File, New Scene. I'm not going to save this one because I don't really want it, but I click on Don't Save and File Import. And let's import my OBJ. So curtain, OBJ, and I'm going to import that. And now if I click on this, you can see that it's just an object. It does not have that cloth data on it, and we can treat this like any other model now. It is a completely black surface. So let's see, maybe we can assign an existing material. So I just right clicked, assign existing material, and you can assign Lambert 1, or you can assign the default OpenPBR. And now you have your final cloth. So for anything that is curtains or something that does not have too much thickness, you can assign thickness to this. So in object mode, you could shift right click and extrude to assign thickness after you create the cloth. But depending on what kind of object it is, you just may want to leave it as it is. So not all cloth needs thickness, especially if it's really thin cloth, but I added a little thickness here. So now we have this two-sided cloth that is clean and ready to use in an environment. So this is a fun bonus for Ncloth that will let you create a surface that actually tears up. So you could have a turn-up surface. Let me add more keyframes, and okay, let's make sure my playback speed is set correctly. Play every frame, max real time, and I have cache playback on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to create this Ncloth. So I'm going to make sure that my history is deleted. And I'm going to go to my effects menu and Ncloth, create Ncloth. And I'm going to use a different constraint for this one to actually hold this up so that gravity doesn't like push it to the ground. I'm going to go to select some vertices on the top. Let's say we alternate. Let's select some of these. And I'm going to go to N constraint and transform constraint. And what that is going to do essentially is it's going to hold these up. It's not held to a particular object. These vertices, like whenever the cloth is simulating, these vertices will not move. And you can control this. So it creates this dynamic constraint here, and you should be able to control it using that dynamic constraint. So you can most likely move this up. So you could move this cloth around. So if I add a keyframe to this dynamic constraint here, and if I go to another frame, let's go to an earlier frame actually and move this, or let's move it up a bit. You should be able to control how that cloth moves. So let's set this, and so the dynamic constraint will essentially hold these vertices in place, whatever your cloth does. I'm going to break the connections of that animation because this is not what we want to do. I'm just going to let us hold that up. And now let's create an object that collides with us. So let's say the sphere is going to be our object, and let us move this here, and let's add some keyframes. So one here and one at like 30 or 40, let's say here, and we move that so it pushes through that surface. And the next thing we need to do, so now it's not really going to do anything, we need to make this a passive collider first. So Ncloth, create passive collider, and now we watch it. It's still not gonna tear through the surface. It's gonna hit it and create some sort of animation. But now let's add a tearable surface here. So I'm gonna select this and go to vertex mode and select a few vertices. So I'm gonna hold down Tab to just select some random vertices in certain areas. So let's say these surfaces are our surfaces that are going to tear off. So I'm making it random so that it's not a clear tear. It's just let's select a few more here, and then you go back to end constraint and just set a tearable surface constraint. Let's let that run through. Once that has run through, you have a bit of a cache. Let me play that back and see what we got. So let's get it back. And you essentially get a torn up piece of cloth. And the stair is really going to depend on where you set these vertices. You're going to get, they're going to look different depending on which surface is actually tearable. And yeah, this is our torn up cloth. You can choose a frame that you like and use that for your final model.